Thank you. Good morning to the Timbercrest community. I'm Judy Myers-Waltz. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dwight Beery for his piano introduction, and I want to thank June Seeley for making the connection with me today, and Brian Daniels for doing the tech. As I said, I'm Judy Myers-Waltz. Some of you might know my parents, Doreen and Carl Myers. Dad was a pastor for many years and then became a district executive in Illinois and Wisconsin. And then they were Timbercrest residents from about 2008 until 2012 when Mom died and 2014 when Dad died. My husband and I finished building a house shortly after that and moved here to North Manchester from Lafayette. I had been a professor there. I was a Manchester grad, but then I became a professor after I went to grad school at Purdue and became a professor in child development and family studies there. But we've enjoyed being here in the North Manchester community. And for those of you who don't know the setup, I'm standing in the doorway of the chapel and enjoying this brisk morning and technically not being in Timbercrest while I'm being at Timbercrest. So I am here to give you a message this morning, and what I have called it is Caring, Captivity, Caution, or Confusion, Making Meaning in These Hard Times. These are hard times. For more than a year and a half, literally the entire world has faced hard times. Illness and death, and the threat of illness and death, have touched every country in the world and every corner of our lives. We think about it, that we think it's getting better, and we think things are improving, and then it turns back around. The book of Job talked about this kind of time. In Job 30:27, it says, "The churning inside of me never stops. Days of suffering confront me." I think many of us have sounded like that. You've probably felt that way multiple times in the last year and a half. These times have been hard in part because the very things that we need to reassure us and help us feel better are the things that are taken away from us in this pandemic. We need touch. We need hugs. Actually, hugs are one of the things that help our brains and help our bodies, but we have to keep social distance. And we need contact with the people we love. We need to be with them, but we need social distance, especially in high-risk communities like Timbercrest. So we've got these lockdowns, and many of you during these lockdowns and these partial lockdowns, these separations from other people, might start to identify with Psalm 107, verse 10, that says, "Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains." You're not actually in chains. You're not actually in darkness. Actually, it's a pretty sunny day today, but it might feel like it. You might feel betrayed. You expected the people around you to care for you and meet your needs. This felt like a safe place. Timbercrest is actually a pretty safe place. It's a pleasant place. You might have felt like this is where you came to be cared for. And it might have been home for many of you for a long time or maybe for a short time, but COVID might have changed the way that you feel about this place. Timbercrest, home, might have started to feel like a prison. In fact, I've heard some residents talk about lockdowns as incarceration. Off and on, If you haven't even been allowed to have dinner with each other within Timbercrest. So some of you might have wished that you were any place else besides here. Although when you think about it, considering what's happening, I don't know where else you could go where it wouldn't be like that. Although there are some places where they think things aren't happening now, but it's not over. People are opening up more than they should be in some cases. In times of uncertainty of any kind, there's a lot of fear. There's fear of the unknown, and there's been a lot that we haven't known during this pandemic. Many of you were afraid for your health. And the caregivers here were afraid for your health. And your family members were afraid for your health. My family members were afraid for my health. Some caregivers and family members were afraid for their own health. And many of us haven't known what would keep you and all of us and themselves healthy and safe. And the best guesses for what would keep us all safe kept changing. So there was fear. And some other common reactions and emotions during hard times are depression and anger and confusion and sometimes guilt. Guilt because you're doing well, guilt because you're not following the recommendations, all kinds of things. So hard times can lead to all kinds of strong emotions. They can deal with all of this, but you know, hard times can also lead to resilience. It's possible to not only survive, but to get stronger during hard times. Even Job was able to find strength. In Job 36:15, he said, "But those who suffer, he delivers in their suffering. He speaks to them in their affliction." So there are several kinds of things that can help in that process of resilience. I want to focus on one area that was identified by an author named Froma Walsh. She wrote a book on family resilience. And I know many of you are not with your families right now. You're living here, but living here is kind of living with family. You're creating a family. And when she talks about family resilience, she's talking about community. And you're in a community. What she's talking about is instead of resilience being an individual characteristic that people carry with them, she's saying resilience is created by family and community. It's by people working together to create resilience. So I think it fits well. So because she talks about resilience coming out of relationships and community, what I want to do is pull out one of the groups of skills that she talks about. And that group is called belief systems. She lists 3 kinds of skills within that category. One of them is making meaning. Another is focusing on the positive. And the third is rising above the hard times. So let's start with making meaning. This means figuring out how you're going to make sense of what's happening, how you're going to understand it and interpret it. So, does looking at lockdowns and all the other things that are happening mean that it's a step backwards? Is it a step sideways? Or is it a step forwards? What do you think? How do you respond when you hear there's another lockdown? And what reactions have you heard from others? How does it feel when you've heard that there's another one being announced? Is it something that just happens at this time? Or is it a time to blame someone for not playing by the rules? Is it a sign that the administration is taking good care of you? Or are they overreacting and being mean to you? And let's talk about vaccines. Do they mean freedom and flexibility to get the vaccine? Or does it mean freedom to not get the vaccine? Does it mean discomfort and control by other people to get the vaccine? Do you trust them or not? We've heard lots of arguments about vaccines, and we know that they don't mean the same thing to everyone. What do they mean to you? And what do they mean to the people around you? Now, you can't control other people's process of finding meaning. But you can control your own, at least to some certain extent. Resilience is based on finding meaning, making it a meaningful experience, not just a random experience. You'll have an easier time dealing with hard times if you don't assume that others are doing something to you on purpose. Hard times are hardest if you think someone is doing something to you on purpose. They're hurting you on purpose. But assuming the best intentions of other people will help you. And that's consistent with my faith. I don't know about yours. It's hard to find meaning, though, when caution and care lead to pain and separation. But as you search for meaning, focus on also what you've learned during this time. That can help you find meaning out of all of this. And that seems to be what Job did. He also found a connection with his faith. Celebrate the success of the low infection rate at Timbercrest. What they've done hasn't always been comfortable, but think how successful it's been at keeping COVID down and keeping other infections down here. It's kept people pretty healthy. The words you use when you think about what's going on will also help shape your meaning making and how you deal with what's going on. Instead of talking about incarceration, you might want to talk about caution and talk about care, not unkindness. And when you think about how the caregivers are responding to the changing expectations and the fact that things go differently from day to day, think about the changing knowledge base and the fact that we're learning more, so that's why things keep changing, not confusion. This is all then translating into the second skill that I want to talk about, and that is being positive. It's not easy to find the positive in struggles, but it can be freeing. How have you used the time during the pandemic? That's one thing that you can think about when you're thinking about the positive. Have you used your time differently? Have you learned to be more reflective during this time, a little less busy and overwhelmed with busyness during this time? I think many people have made decisions about what is and is not important during this time. We've had to give up a lot since the pandemic started and the lockdowns began. So what have you given up that you're glad you've given up? And what have you given up that you're really looking forward to getting back? Have you thought differently about the way you spent your time before and the way you spend your time now? I think we've developed a new appreciation for some of the things that we used to do, but we've also developed an appreciation for some of the things we've given up. and realized that maybe we didn't need to be doing all the things that we were doing before. We've learned to sort through some of what we've done and set priorities in new ways. Also, think about some of the skills you've learned. Have you learned some creative ways to stay in touch with people? Did you know anything about window visits before? You've learned things about how to talk on the telephone through a window. And how about Skype and Zoom and WebEx and Teams and all kinds of other electronic resources? We've all learned a lot about that. Now, some of the things we never wanted to learn, but we've learned a lot, and if nothing else, you've learned who to call to help you with those things, even if you can't do it yourself. And some of you may have even gotten more experience and comfort and maybe relearned some things about writing letters and cards. We've learned new ways to stay in touch and maybe gotten in touch with people you haven't gotten in touch with for a long time. Another skill I wanted to mention is rising above the hard times. Now, faith runs through all three skills that I'm talking about in the belief systems category. That's kind of obvious in the name belief systems, but it's especially true in rising above the hard times. How have you used your faith during this time? How have you rested on your faith? Faith tells you, at least my faith tells me, that I'm not alone. My faith tells me that the world was created by God. God looked at creation and said that it was good. However, God did not create a world without struggle and difficulties. But God did not leave us alone. God walks with us through those troubles. Now, do you believe that? And if not, what else do you believe? How has your faith helped you during these times? Another part of rising above hard times is sharing your faith and serving others. One important part of resilience is reminding yourself that you are not helpless in all of this. Redefine yourself. You don't have to be a victim. You do have to follow rules. There are things you need to learn, but you can be the hands of hope and a channel for God during this time. How can you express support and appreciation to others? There are plenty of opportunities for appreciation. A big part of that is just listening to others. We talked about the different meanings that people might have for the pandemic and for vaccines. Instead of trying to convince others to believe what you believe, what you can do is just ask them what they believe. Ask them to share their meaning and don't judge their thoughts. I know there are differences between the residents and the workers here. Ask them what they believe. And maybe they'll want to hear what you believe. Don't make it an argument. Don't make it a chance to convince the other person. Just listen. And then talk about why. Maybe you'll want to talk about why you believe what you believe, but you don't need to convince each other. Build bridges. And maybe exchanging ideas would be a service. Maybe no one has listened to them. And how else can you be creative about providing service and building bridges and listening during this time? So we've talked about three parts of belief systems as a way to build resilience for yourself and those around you. As we said, you can make meaning, be positive, and rise above the hard times. These times are hard, and we're not through them yet. They can feel restrictive and cruel, or they can feel caring, safe, and they can challenge your creativity. So maybe if you try these skills, you can transform your suffering as Job did in Job 36:15, and say, "But those who suffer, he delivers in their suffering, and he speaks to them in their affliction." And maybe you can speak to others. I wish you the best as you work on applying those skills and moving forward in these hard times. Thank you.